Speech about being on time.
Good evening and welcome to the Enrollment and Facility Study Commission meeting. This is March 13th, 2019, and we'll start with roll call here and find out who's with us tonight. Start with your name and your affiliation or who you're representing, and we'll start over here on my left.
Sure. Kevin Brewster, and I'm here as a representative for the PEA.
Jen Cooper, BHP EdTech representative.
Tiana Yuri, student rep.
Ben Grant, public member.
Javier Botana, superintendent.
Peter Eglinton, parent, former school board chair, and former chief operations officer for Portland Public Schools.
Christopher Dana, community member and Longfellow parent.
Mark Hubbard, I'm the admin assistant at King Middle School, and I'm representing the base union, which is support staff.
Sheila Jepson, principal at Portland High School, representing Portland administrators.
Cheryl Crowley from Cliff Island, representing Island Schools, and a parent.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate your being here. There were a few individuals who could not join us tonight. Both Councilor Cook and Councilor Ali had a meeting in Washington, D.C., I believe, and they could not be here. Ms. Morioni from the school board also had another engagement that she could not leave, and so she will not be joining us either. We are expecting at least 2 additional commission members to join us, and they should be here by the time that we start deliberating on options. And we actually have one additional person here that just joined us. Would you please say your name and your affiliation?
Good evening, Nicole Breeding, community member, parent and educator.
Thank you very much. So tonight the agenda includes, we've done our introductions and welcome. We will move to a quick overview of our norms, recap the options that we've considered to date. I will then walk through the process for coming up with a final recommendation. After I do that, there'll be an opportunity for questions, any remaining questions that the commission members have, whether it's based on the material we've received to date during our meetings or due to comments that we received at our public hearing. Then we will move into our deliberation and end the evening with a vote. Even though we don't have every member of the commission here tonight, we do have a quorum, which is 9 individuals. So I appreciate everyone being able to attend. Next slide, please. So these are the norms that we've been operating under since the beginning. I want to highlight a couple. The one in particular for both our group as well as the broader community, it's been important for us to assume positive intent. We're all bringing our perspectives and our knowledge to this work, and we're all doing it with the hopes for the best for the Portland Public Schools and the broader community. Also want to emphasize that it's been by design that we've been encouraging and welcoming all input, and I appreciate everyone's efforts to truly listen to each other and to the district staff that we've had, as well as the consultants and the public. We've been focused, and I appreciate that. So the next slide. I want to remind everyone on the parameters for our study. Why are we here? So the goal for us has been to look for ways to save costs by right-sizing, focusing on school facilities. It's been out of our scope to look specifically at educational programming issues, realizing that there one, isn't a lot of time for that, and two, that's the purview of the school board and the district, the superintendent to navigate. That said, a lot of our discussions have absolutely raised questions about the programming impacts of the options that are available. We considered all aspects of pre-K through 12, and we're very open to the possibility of reconfiguring the different grade spans, and you'll see that reflected in all of the options that we investigated. It was known up front that school consolidations and closures are possible, and that part of the efficiencies in the moves could involve shifting non-school functions of the district to school facilities. When do we know when we're done? It's when we have a set of recommendations or a recommendation for the school board to consider. They're expecting us to have looked through all of the background information, to have discussed the various options, and to listen to the public, and then to come forward with one or more recommendations for their consideration. I want to emphasize that we are not decision makers at all in this, and all of the options that we looked at would need much more analysis and work before they could be implemented. And so the next step will be for the school board to take up the issue and determine what are the next best steps. Next slide. So wanted to walk through the various options that we did consider. There were 4.5, or you could consider them 5 if you broke up the first option. But the first that we looked at involved creating a K through 12 expeditionary learning school, creating a 10 through 12 high school, having either 2 6 through 9 middle schools, or I should say junior highs, or three 6 through 9 middle schools, and then moving Portland Adult Ed to Casco Bay High School, and then shifting Bayside and the administration to a middle school. This option was considered and voted for do not consider further for a couple of reasons. One of the options would actually cost money, and that was not within our charge. And the other would have potentially saved $2 million, but involved such a significant rethinking of how the district functioned that the commission felt that it wasn't worth the cost. And I will look to folks after I'm done with the summary to make sure I didn't miss anything important. The second option that we looked at was to consolidate 10 through 12 high school grades into one high school, continue to maintain Casco Bay High School, although questions still remained in the option of how to do that. Creating a 7 through 9 junior high school, 5 through 6 upper elementary school, and then for the elementary buildings that exist currently, changing them to a pre-K through 4. And then looking at the repurposed middle school for a combination of administration, the Bayside program, and Portland Adult Ed. Those were areas to look at, although we didn't consider those functions specifically and programs specifically. That option is option 2, and it's the one that's coming forward tonight as an option to consider only if necessary. The other option that we looked at was creating a 10 through 12 high school, 8 through 9 middle school, 2 6 through 7 middle schools, so an intermediate school, and then using the repurposed buildings for administration, the Bayside program in Portland Adult Ed. That one was rejected from consideration by the commission because the savings were relatively low, under $1 million, when at the time we were trying to potentially fill a $2 to $4 million budget gap, and given the impacts that it would have. And then finally, we considered just changing the configuration of the elementary schools into elementary clusters. So you would pair up 2 elementary schools, one being kindergarten through 2nd grade and the other being 3 through 5, and you'd have several of these pairs in the district. And then you'd include pre-K within those facilities. That would actually provide savings potentially of just over $1 million. But there again, the commission voted to not consider that because, one, it didn't address the space issues at the secondary school level, and given that the disruption that it might cause at the elementary grade. I'll turn just briefly to the commission members to see if I missed anything in the description of the options. The superintendent is reminding me that I should introduce the commission member that just joined us, Sarah Thompson from the school board. Thank you very much for being here. So with the description of the options, please remind me what the very next
questions.
Yes. Well, before we get to questions, I'd like to go over the process for the final recommendation, particularly since this is not a body that regularly meets. And some of you may have been on an elected board and others may not have. So we have the recommendation that we've teed up, which is the one that we brought to the public hearing. And in the school board world, you could consider that almost a first read, which when a recommendation comes forward, you have a first read, and then the next meeting you have a chance to vote on that. And so what we'll be doing is bringing up option 2, and I'll be looking for someone to move consideration of option 2 as the recommendation to the school board. I'll look for a second for that, and then we'll be able to open up to deliberation and debate. The various options that could occur is that if everybody is happy with option 2 and there are no amendments, then we can move forward with a vote on option 2 as is, that we would recommend it to be considered only if necessary. The second option that could occur is that we amend option 2 to be a different recommendation. So in my communications to the commission, the example that I gave is that someone could offer an amendment to shift option 2 from consider to more research required. That was one of our categories, and so we'd be moving it to another category, and that would be a type of amendment that we could make. Another kind of amendment that someone could offer would be to change an element of option 2. So one of the issues that we were not able to consider is the fate of Casco Bay High School and their grade 9, and there were comments that came up during our public hearing. It could be that an amendment said approve option 2 with the exception of shifting grade 9 from all of the high schools to a single school to put them all on an equal playing field. The drawback to that is we don't know what the space requirements of that is and whether that's possible, but that still could be an amendment that's offered. And then finally, we could either reject the option 2 and change it to do not consider, or we could offer another option that would replace it in its entirety. So if someone has a different way of categorizing the option than those that we had listed on our table, you could offer that in an amendment as well. I think I've captured the full range of things that we could do once we start deliberations. I also want to recognize that we've had another commission member join us, Caitlin LeClaire. Do you want to introduce yourself and your affiliation?
Principal of King Middle School and PAA representative.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us tonight. So with that, I'd like to start with an opportunity for questions. And if you have questions, this is not the time for amendments. This is just the time for questions. If you have any questions, this is the time to raise your hand, and I will recognize you. And I try to keep a list of who's raised their hand, so I hit everybody that wants to speak. Does anyone have a question? Yes, Mr. Grant.
Process-wise, whatever we do here tonight, where does it go? Does it go to the next school board meeting? Or can you just walk us through that?
Sure. Where does it go next? So the board is meeting next week on the 19th, and the recommendation that comes out today will be included in a report that will consolidate a summary of our process, the members, the attendance at each of our meetings, and our recommendation and and a lot of the supporting material. And so that will be assembled before the 19th, and I will be presenting the outcome to the board at their meeting. And then I don't know what their process is once they get it. I don't know if the superintendent has any insights on the process.
I think that's accurate. I mean, the goal, and obviously we've surpassed the time that we initially invested, where we were hoping that we would have time to have the board consider the recommendations ahead of the budget. That is also the day that they will be getting my budget recommendations, so it will be factored into the deliberations from this point forward, but there is no sort of specific timeline for doing anything with it other than to weigh the recommendation that you make as part of the board's budget process.
Does that answer your question?
It does.
Other questions? Once again, about the process and the information that you have at your disposal. Yes, Mr. Dana.
I was hoping the superintendent might be able to give his perspective on sort of one of the common concerns that was expressed throughout the public comments about essentially leaving Casco Bay High School untouched and the potential inequities in that.
So I will say that, you know, from the very beginning, if you look at the resource materials that that were presented when option 2 was considered, that we had as one of the caveats or considerations that Casco Bay was unresolved under option 2, because there are two different ways in which we could have gone. One would be to say that, you know, a number of ninth grade students would leave the large junior high school after their 8th grade year in order to go to Casco Bay, or the other one is to just change Casco Bay to be 10, 11, and 12 in the same way. And that was not resolved, so that is something that would, you know, that we, you know, in essence, did not have a discussion about. And so there are, you know, we did not have a solution. Either one of those are viable, and those would be educational considerations that the board would need to weigh at that time.
Any follow-up? Okay. Other questions? All right, with no other questions, we can open it up for deliberations. But first, in order to deliberate, I need a motion to move the preliminary recommendation, option 2, for approval to the school board. This does not commit you to ultimately voting for it. It's just to allow us to talk about it. So it's moved by Ms. Uri. Any second? Any seconds? Ms. Crowley, for the purposes of deliberation, thank you. Thank you very much. I should say, when we come down to a vote, it will be a roll call vote, and there, what we vote on will be associated with our name. So with that, I will open up for comments on option 2, and it may or may not involve an amendment. You can speak on the option itself, or if you have an amendment that you want us to consider, you can put that forward as well. Anyone? Mr. Dana, thank you.
Throughout this process, I think I felt somewhat uncomfortable about the sort of mismatch between the complexity and the import of these decisions and the level of information that this commission had access to, and just sort of in the way this commission was structured. And so, I don't think I would be able to support that sort of massive restructuring of the entire district in order to save only $2.7 million, which is a single-digit percentage of the district's overall budget. So I would move to amend option 2 to move from only consider if necessary to don't consider.
So you're moving that amendment. Is there a second to that amendment at this time? Ms. Thompson seconds it. Now, the process is we talk about that amendment. And so we're talking about changing the category from consider if necessary to do not consider. Any debate or deliberation on that?
Who's Thompson seconded?
Yes, Thompson seconded. Comments on changing it to do not?
I'm going to attempt it. I have very little voice, but excuse me. For me, the option 2, it was very clear in the public comment that it further, since I've been on the school board, there's been a lot of concern in the community about opening a third high school, Casco Bay High School. And I think that the current configuration of option 2 exasperates that even more in the community. I think it was very clear the other night from public comment that people were saying, well, close Casco. And it's bringing all that up again. And Casco is one of our most successful schools in the district. It's not to diminish any of the other schools, but we've had great success at Casco Bay. The principal of Casco Bay High School also feels very strongly that leaving Casco untouched would not be equitable across the district. For me, while the $2.7 million seems attractive, I don't think it takes into consideration the complete change of sense of community in Portland and what that means to a lot of people here. I don't think it's the fact that we want to turn away from savings, but I think we want to make savings in the sense of it's in the best of the community as well as saving money. And I think it was pretty clear that $2.7 million in the sense for a one-time savings, again, seems attractive, but in the scheme of things, it's a very small part of our budget. What I'd like to see, and again, this is not for this commission to recommend, but on the board level, is that we have further exploration of our high schools and potential looking at what does choice mean in the city of Portland. I know it goes back a long ways of being able to choose your high school. And I think that there's some deep feelings about that in the community. And I think that first and foremost, we should have that discussion as a community as to what it means to be a bulldog or a cougar or a ram, because there is completely different feelings in each of the buildings. And the reason why, kids, our students attend the high schools that they do. I had one that did really well at Portland High and one that did super at Casco Bay. If you had put them in the same high school, I don't think they would have thrived in the same way. So I think that right now we have schools that fit the many different types of learning, and to say we're just going to put them together and do away with that sense of community, to me is not worth the savings. I know that a lot of people are being, probably saying at home, from the very few emails that we got about the cost savings. But I think that there's hopefully some other ways that we can explore down the road. And I'm hopeful, that there's going to be other things. For me, I wanted to have this conversation because I think that the 12 years or now 13 that I've been on the board, every year when we've talked with the council, they've said, well, you could have cost savings from redistricting, you could have cost savings from closing schools. And when I wrote this resolution with the help of a couple of the board members, was let's put this to bed. Let's see the numbers. Let's get the data out there so that the community as a whole can see the process, but also the data, because it's one thing to say it, but another thing to actually see the data in front of you. And I think that it's very clear to me, the elementary schools, there's no change needed there at the moment. The numbers that are coming up through, from what I understand, the numbers at Portland for the incoming class are going to be higher than Deering's, so the numbers again are shifting, and we have a lot of history of numbers shifting. And the numbers coming up through, like I said, are getting bigger. And so short-sightedness, like we did with Presumpscot twice, is closed Presumpscot to reopen it again. So I don't think we're at a point this time in this district to do changes to this extent to save that kind of money. So, thanks.
Thank you. Other comments? Yes, Mr. Grant.
I'm going to vote for the amendment. I think it's important that this commission sends a signal that the changes that the public have learned about are so major that they're not, in fact, our recommendations. When we get to the underlying motion, I'm going to offer an amendment that I spent some time working on today with a couple other members of the commission that I think will reflect a lot of the comments that we've heard already about the scope of the challenges versus the time we've had and the limited scope of this commission, which I'll get into in more detail when we get to the appropriate moment. But for now, I want to say I'll vote to amend as Mr. Dana has proposed, so that we send the right signal. And then I think we can offer some amended language to give the board and the council some further guidance that reflects a lot of what I've been hearing here.
Thank you. Mrs. Uri.
Thank you, Mr. Eglinton. I'm a student. I'm going to be honest with everybody. I'm a student at Casco Bay. And I represent all students, but I'm coming from a perspective of being from Casco Bay. The room we're in right now was the foundation of my teenage years, and I think Ms. Thompson is so correct in saying that the culture at each of the separate high schools is so intricate and treasured and valuable. And looking at the option we have come forward with today, I think that the reorganization in its current state would be compromising at best, and I think that it really compromises the idea of the whole student that we try to value. And we have gained a lot of valuable insight about the shape of our district and the challenges we face. But we do have to remember that, our budget does need to fit our strategic plan. It needs to fit our Portland promise. And from what I've seen from this option, and again, it's complex, but from what I've seen from this option, I think that it compromises the whole student achievement and equity and all of them, honestly. And I think the data we've gathered, again, it doesn't have any sort of shelf life. It will always be here for the board to look to in different times and different circumstances. But I don't think it elegantly untangles the moderate inefficiencies of the district. And I think it's really important to remember all the integral educational and cultural aspects that we have in our schools in their current configuration and think about what that transitional period will be from like a kindergarten level to a senior and high school level, because it will be drastically different in both. So I've been hearing a lot, students are very resilient, and that's very true. But also, I think the foundation of our schools as they are and our facilities build that resilience, and our community is what builds that strength to be speaking out in a commission of adults and to be an advocate for a community. So I think that at this moment, I don't see the point of putting forth a recommendation that's not ready and that will be turned down at the school board level. So I will have to agree with Ms. Thompson on this point. Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Jepson.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I will say that I came into this committee thinking one thing, and after hearing all of the data, hearing from the public, getting emails and letters, and most recently from a number of students, and speaking with students as well, I think another way. And I think one of the aspects that we heard from the public hearing was that school is about the human aspect, and that a lot of what we were talking about was the structure and steel and that aspect of it, and really the passion for what I have for schools, and I think what we hear from Tiana or any other student is about the human aspect of what we do in schools. I think that our high schools have, over the past 6 years, put a lot into programming and identifying themselves as a model, and students choose that school because of a model that we've invested a lot of time and money in. And that really also, schools are about community, and I think our communities really deserve us tending to that aspect of community. I do wonder if this is something that's gonna, this conversation is gonna reoccur at another time when, as budgets go, they shift and change, and as Ms. Thompson referred to, will it be put to bed, or will this issue come up again if we're in a state where we need to look at reducing costs? So that's, I guess, an outstanding question I have, and I too will be supporting the amendment.
Thank you. Ms. Bradeen?
I support and echo what my other commission members have just said, and just want to underscore that while I do understand that we will likely need to reduce costs in the future, I think we should look, the community or the school board or whoever continues to be on part of this conversation should really take a close look at some of the highlights of what both parents and students and community members think about what are some of the strengths of the community and what can we not afford to cut, but what are the areas that we can think about creatively as we move our district forward. What are some innovative ways to structure our programs while also cutting costs? Because I do understand this will likely come up again and again.
Thank you. Other comments? Yes, Mr. Brewster.
So I'd like to read Sue Olafson's comments that she sent to me via email and then add on my own. So she started with, "I'm sorry that I cannot attend tonight's meeting due to a previous commitment. I've considered carefully the input provided by teachers and students during the Commission's public comment on February 25th, and also letters from the public sent to me that include several from students. And I've decided that I cannot support the option 2 school consolidation plan for the following reasons. The primary reason for this facilities and enrollment study was to cut costs in anticipation of another year of multi-million-dollar loss in state funding, and we have recently been notified by the state that the district will not lose any state funding this year. Not enough consideration has been given to how these district-wide changes will impact staff, students, and programming. I'm especially concerned about a change from a middle school model to a junior high model in order to cut dozens of teaching positions without a conversation about whether this is a shift in philosophy that we want to make, and that there was no consideration about whether or how we would be able to retain King's expeditionary learning model that has been recognized nationally. Had I been present, I would have voted to change the commission's preliminary recommendation for option 2 to do not consider. Thanks, Sue Olafson, President of the PEA. In addition to my fellow commissioners, I understand the purview of our commission, but I really think that to just look at the buildings without the programming is backwards, that you need to start with the programming and ask the question, what's best for students, what's best for student achievement and student learning, and to fit your physical plant to match what's best for students, and that this process is not going to do that. So I'm in support of the amendment as well.
Thank you, both Ms. Olafson and Mr. Brewster. Other comments? Yes, Ms. LeClaire.
I would just echo some of the same thoughts from other members of the commission, and even just in the moment-to-moment or day-to-day experiences that we have within our schools, the ability to do what we are able to do with the resources that we have is really, I believe, strongly, we are able to do that because of the relationships that we are able to build with students and with families. And that allows us to connect with kids and help them to achieve academically and socially and emotionally. And the configuration of schools and the number of transitions that students and families would have, students and families that already struggle with trauma and poverty and language, I think would be really detrimental. And I agree with Tiana that when thinking about the Portland Promise and student achievement and equity, this doesn't seem like this would be helping us to fulfill those goals, rather creating different challenges for us. So I would agree to support the amendment.
Thank you. Other comments, debate? Seeing none, I'll share some of mine. So when this commission was started, and actually for the first few months, we were looking at a pretty significant gap. It was not only a potential gap of $2 to $4 million for the coming year, but a forecasted further decrease the following two, if I recall correctly. So this was not a one-year issue. And having been on the school board and having been with the school district as the chief operations officer, I know that school budget challenges come up every year at levels that are below what we were looking at. Very difficult choices. And with the cuts that have been made over the years, there aren't many places to go to. So for me, from the very beginning, one of the values that I saw in this commission was an opportunity for a group to come together and take a look at the data and what you could do if you, what it would cost and what would be the impacts of doing what people in the community have recommended every year, or at least every few years. As Ms. Thompson said, a lot of these questions come up because there are gut senses that there must be something you could cut. All you need to do is shift students. All you need to do is close a building. And for me, the value of having a dedicated consultant and time to look at the information was to see that if you had to cut on the order of $2 to $3 million, and all you could do, in quotes, would be to close a building or change the configurations, this is what you're looking at. These are the options that you're looking at. And they're pretty significant. And if the district is faced with such a cut in the future, the community will know this is the kind of thing that you will need to do if you need to cut the budget by this much, if the way that you want to do is through facilities. And so for me, this was the first time that several options were raised and analyzed in that form. And so I appreciate that. I also recognize that we've had very little time to even look at the data that we've had. The consultants have had very little time to pull it together. And in fact, our consultant said that the typical process that he's familiar with is more on the order of 18 months. And we only had really a couple months, and particularly when you think that some of that we weren't deliberating and looking at options for the first several. So the thought that we were trying to collapse so that we could be informative for the current budget with such a short amount of time was a challenge, but we dutifully went through the options, and I thank the commission for doing that. Part of what else weighs on my mind is that we were brought together to come up with one or more recommendations to inform the process. And we've spent quite a bit of time together. And in the past, the school board has created task forces and other groups that have come together, and maybe they've come out with an option just to see it languish. And this is maybe on the more positive side, not trying to cut the weight as much as we're trying to cut. And they've brought it forward, then either there was no action or it was rejected, perhaps for very good reason. And the feeling was that, you brought together the community members and they worked really hard and they came up with nothing. And so part of me is to make a short story long, I'm uneasy about labeling all of the options do not consider for that reason. And I was when I came here tonight, and I was prepared to hope to get to a place where we were coming forward with no specific recommendation versus officially saying do not consider for all of the options that we provided, to signal the fact that we couldn't come to agreement and put it forward with the information that we have. With that in mind, and the fact that that wasn't the amendment that was put forward initially, I'm inclined to vote for this amendment so that we can move forward with explaining why we came to that conclusion and explaining why this process has been so valuable, and it's been worth our time and the district's time to pay for the information, to spend, look at the information, and to have talked about it on several occasions. And so it's not my preferred vote to say do not consider. Not that I would put forward suggesting that we have the board consider option 2, but I will vote for the amendment, and that will, if everybody sticks with that, it will move back to the main motion, which is the motion as amended. That's typically what happens, and then we will see if there are any other amendments. So with that, are there any other comments or deliberation? Yes, a question from Ms. Thompson.
So even with the amendment vote, you'll be doing that as a roll call as well? Or to the final vote?
Well, it's really the final vote is my understanding.
Okay.
But we can,
Because the amendment seems as though it's going to be maybe the major turning point here.
It is.
So I didn't know whether or not we might want to consider that as well. But
do you have
I'll leave it to
any
you.
I'm not sure
guidance?
I understand the question, and I'm terrible at this.
I think,
Parliamentary.
Yes, yeah. So,
I think one of us could move to have it done by roll call.
yeah, we could do that.
So I'll make that motion.
So we're going to amend the amendment, which would.
I don't think that amends the amendment. I think it just means we're going to vote
Right.
by roll call on the amendment.
You're asking for unanimous consent, maybe, to move to roll call?
Sure.
Okay. Without objection, we will have a roll call vote for this amendment, as well as any subsequent amendments and the final motion. So with that, we'll go around. Yes?
Can we just make sure
Ms. Jepsen.
we read so we know what we're voting on?
Yes.
And everybody else does?
So the amendment is to change the recommendation of the commission from consider only if necessary consider option 2 only if necessary to do not consider option 2.
Thank you.
And the other options already have been marked as do not consider from a prior vote. Any other questions? Yes, Mr. Superintendent.
So I just want to be clear on that point, which is, I think, what I thought Ms. Thompson was asking. When you're voting now, and the vote is to change the recommendation to not to consider option 2, is that the vote is that the final vote, or are you then going to vote on that?
It's a little awkward. Usually, if it's changing an element of a motion, you would vote on the amendment and then the main motion. In this case, it really is the same thing, but we're treating it as a two-step process.
Okay,
Because
that's what I wanted to be.
if I may, you have to have the
Because you
opportunity to
wanted
offer
to-
additional amendments.
Right.
So that's why I need the two-step.
Exactly.
All right.
So with that, let's take a vote. We'll start with Mr. Brewster. This is on the amendment.
I'm in favor of the amendment.
Yep. Ms. Cooper?
Also in favor?
Ms. Brigeen?
Also in favor of the amendment?
Ms. Uri?
In favor of the amendment.
Mr. Grant?
Yay.
Mr. Eglinton, yay. Ms. Thompson?
Yay.
Aye.
Yes.
In favor of the amendment?
In favor of the amendment?
In favor of the amendment.
All right. Thank you. The amendment passes unanimous of all those present. We are now open for further amendments. Are there any additional amendments? Mr. Grant?
As I alluded to before, I spent some time in the last couple of days working with Councilor Cook and former Councilor Brenneman on a statement that we could amend to our recommendation of really no recommendation. I think in part in recognition of what Mr. Eglinton just stated, that we were asked to do something, and I think it'd be better if we came back with some thoughts and explanation and maybe some hints, as opposed to just say, no, we've looked at this and don't do anything. So I have shared with Peter a draft that I think you can put up on the screen. But actually, before you do that, let me just talk for a minute about sort of how I got to this point. I think like everyone, I came at this with an open mind and really hopeful to be able to make decisions based on data, in part to uncover, what's long been kind of talked about, sort of conventional wisdom in the city about what's the situation with school enrollments, and now we have those answers. And I think even if we make no recommendation to do anything, this process has been invaluable to extract that data for everyone to consider at all levels going forward. I think what the data showed us, well, certainly it showed me, is that while there may be some inefficiencies in the district, they're not great enough that we can make simple changes. In fact, we're only left with complicated changes. And those complicated changes don't save a whole lot of money in the grand scheme of things. I think we need to deliver that message to the school board, and to go on to say that if you want to achieve savings in this type of area, like I think it was Kevin or him reading Sue said before, it should be driven by the educational programming and policy side, not coming up from the facilities side. So with that, I tried to, the three of us tried to capture that in a statement that maybe you can put up and people can take a minute to consider.
And I'm willing to read it, if that works, would be helpful for everyone. I've got it on my phone. I'm using my technology appropriately. It's one of our norms. Just want to let you know. It's somewhat lengthy, so let me get right to it. The Enrollment and Facilities Study Commission was charged with evaluating the most effective and efficient use of our school buildings. The consultant provided relevant data indicating a steady K-12 student population over the past decade and in future projections, but also showed some facility inefficiencies. The commission was asked to develop new ideas for potential reconfigurations that would use Portland's existing space more efficiently. The exercise of trying to conceive of new configurations at a single meeting and the resulting analysis and discussion raised questions that extended beyond the scope of the commission's charge. Facility changes that impact educational programming need to be considered in light of education policy and district goals, as well as budgetary issues. For this reason, we do not recommend that the school board focus on any specific reconfigurations at this time. Rather, we recommend that the school board and city council consider the following issues in the larger context of Portland's budget and educational needs, and work to develop both a short-term and long-term plan that will ensure both efficient and high-quality education in Portland. Number one, it is imperative that Portland schools run as efficiently as practicable in order to ensure Portland offers a high-quality educational experience for students. Number two, the superintendent and school board have expressed a desire to expand and enhance educational programs and services in the future, which, if approved, require additional state and local tax dollars to implement. Number three, while efficiency is suboptimal at some schools, the study commission did not uncover any obvious or easy reconfigurations that would improve efficiency without significant educational programming changes. Number four, in the near term, the school board and school administration should seriously evaluate filling excess space in school buildings with programs or offices that currently exist outside of the elementary, middle, and high school buildings, in particular school administrative offices and Portland Adult Education. Any future consideration to reconfigure educational programming should not be done hastily or by a group solely charged with looking at demographic and efficiency data. Major shifts in grade configuration involves educational, programming, and transportation considerations that went beyond the charge and scope of this study commission.
Thanks. So I would move to amend with this document.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Crowley. Any discussion or questions on this amendment? Yes, Ms. Crowley.
I just want to say thank you very, very much for taking the time to think about this, articulate this in such a clear manner. It's been my concern all along after the public hearing that there's been some misunderstanding about what we've been charged with and why we came to our decisions. And I think this is an incredibly beautifully written document that certainly reflects how I feel. And so I just want to say thank you for that.
Yes, Ms. Bradeen.
I would completely agree with that. It really beautifully illuminates what was going through my head, so thank you.
Other questions or comments on Mr. Grant's amendment?
I did catch one typo, so I can strike out one letter for the final copy if we end up adopting it.
Sorry if I introduced one. It's the first time I had read it, so.
No, I just caught it after reading it several times.
Ms. Yuri.
Thank you. What would it look like to have this amendment on top of the other amendment? Like, I'm just confused about what that means.
So my question, I have a similar question. My question for Mr. Grant is your amendment to replace the current motion on the table with this recommendation, this document, basically?
No, my intent was to keep the current motion and make this an amendment too. So the recommendation would be whatever you said before, not to consider.
Not to consider option 2.
Right, and then we would
And
amend
then,
it with this.
add
Add
this-
this statement
Add the statement.
to provide some context.
So to clarify the motion, the amendment that is on the table right now, it would be to provide this information along with the currently amended motion to recommend that the school board not consider option 2. Yes.
I really don't see it as an amendment per se. It's just more so having agreement that this is a document that captures the work that we did. So I don't see it as an amendment per se, but more of appendix to the work that we've done. So I think it's more just in agreement if we feel as though this captures the sentiment of what we've done here. So I'm uncomfortable with saying it's an amendment, but more so of saying it's in support of the work that we've done when we introduce this to the board. So I guess I'm just looking for more so, opposed to saying it's an amendment, that this is an agreement that captures the work that we've done in presentation to the board itself. So I would say that, I don't feel there's an amendment needed. It's just more of a agreement.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. Just to follow up on that, in thinking through the main motion at this point, our amendment was to change the category from consider only if necessary to do not consider, which puts all of the recommendations in the do not consider category. So what would go forward to the school board right now would be no options are being recommended because they were all of the ones considered were listed as do not consider. And then this would be attached. Correct. Okay. Is that what you had in mind, Mr. Grant?
I would still prefer to style it as an amendment. I think it's important this commission to have an official record of where we came down. So
I fully agree with Mr. Grant on that.
Okay. That is the current structure at the moment that we're debating, so. Any other comments, debate? Ms. Yuri?
So what is the amendment? Like, what are we voting on?
So the amendment on the table is to include this document, the statement, along with our report to the school board, along with our recommendation, which is no recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
Semantics.
To give everyone another bit of context, or to reiterate what I mentioned earlier, what we'll be presenting to the board is a report. And the report will include process, it'll include a section on recommendations, and it will include background information. That section on recommendations would be a page, if the current motion is approved, would be the table that we had with all listed as do not consider. And then this document would follow, or perhaps even precede that page. So we're talking about 2 pages of this larger report, and our deliverable is the report. Does that help, Ms. Yuri, specifically? Any other comments on the amendment to include the statement in the report? Is that okay? All right. So with that, I will move to a vote. We'll keep going around the same way so we don't get disoriented. Mr. Brewster?
I vote in favor of the amendment.
I also vote in favor of the amendment.
I vote in favor of the amendment.
I'm in favor.
Yay.
I'm in favor.
Yay.
In favor.
I'm in favor.
I'm in favor.
I'm in favor of the amendment.
I'm in favor.
All right, so the amendment passes. So now we're back to the main motion, which once again includes a table with all options reflecting do not consider and this statement. Are there any additional amendments that anyone would like to offer? Seeing none, we can move to a vote on the motion. Once again, it is to approve sending to the school board a report that includes a table with all options listed as do not consider with this statement from the commission on the relevant issues. With that, we'll start once again with Mr. Brewster.
I vote in favor.
Vote
Cooper?
in favor.
I vote in favor.
I'm in favor.
Yay.
I'm in favor.
Yay.
In favor.
I'm in favor.
I'm in favor.
I'm in favor.
I'm in favor.
Thank you very much. Is there any additional commentary from the superintendent?
No, but let me just, present. Just reiterating that what Chair Eglinton said, that this will become a part of the final report, the draft final report that is to be submitted to the board on March 19th, and that you will be presenting. So it's, I think, just to be clear that that's the next step in the process, and that this would be the last, formal meeting of the commission as a result of that. And just, my gratitude for the tremendous work that everyone has done. I think, I would reiterate what I heard many of you say, that, I've been here for, this is my third year, and for 2 years throughout the budget process, I heard people ask questions about, closing elementary schools or, high school reconfiguration and things along those lines. And so clearly, we know what that would look like. We know what the savings are. And, you as the people that were charged with looking at that have issued a value statement about what your recommendation is to the Board of Education, who makes those decisions about the impact and the viability of those options. And so, I'm sure there will be people that agree with the recommendation. I'm sure there will be people that disagree with the recommendation. But I just want to say that I'm incredibly grateful for the amount of time, energy, and commitment that you've put into this work. I greatly appreciate the deliberation, the deliberate, open-minded effort to look at all of the different options and to land where you did. And I have a tremendous amount of respect for each of you individually and for the process. I obviously, remember pulling Peter in for a fake breakfast to ask him if he would consider doing this. And it wasn't a fake breakfast. We actually did have breakfast. But the pretense of the breakfast was to be able to spring this request on him. And I still don't think that we could have had a better person to do this work. And I think your management of this process has been masterful, and I'm, humbled and grateful for the opportunity to serve with you.
Well, thank you, and I'm honored to have worked with all of you. I've got the utmost respect. I knew many of you and didn't know some of you, and I feel like We were true colleagues, and I look forward to crossing paths with you again at some point. Seems somewhat anticlimactic, but I know that we have one question at least.
I just think, again, semantics. This is our final report that we're recommending to the Portland Board of Public Education, so the word draft is no longer applicable. It is our final report, so we need to take the word draft out of there.
I want to just say that we will not have a clean copy that I feel comfortable is our final report in time for what you are getting on Tuesday. We do not have the final report from the consultants at this point, so I purposely put draft in there because I just spent, 2 hours on the phone on the final Davis demographics report, where there are still changes that need to happen with that report. And so I do think that this is a draft final report that, captures the substance of everything that we've talked about, but is not going to be in final report until we actually get an opportunity to read it upside down, inside out, and do all of the necessary editing with that. And that's the purpose of the draft on there.
So what I would recommend, listening to Ms. Thompson, is that it's referred to as the final recommendation and draft report. And if we do that, then we've captured, and there's not the implication that we'll be coming back together again, although I'd love to get back together again. Ms. Leclerc.
That captures exactly what I wanted to say. Thank you.
You did a really wonderful job reading to us, Peter. But I'm a visual person. Is there a way that we can get a copy of that?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
This was fairly last minute, and but I will make sure that everybody has a copy. And I appreciate the efforts of Mr. Grant and Councilors Cook and Ali. You've prepared my statement for the board. Not only will it be in the report, but I will use it as the basis for my comments. So.
And Brenneman, too.
And Mr. Brenneman, yep. Yes, thank you, Mr. Brenneman. Yes, Ms. Yuri.
Thank you. You mentioned it was going to be in the board report, and it's also going to be released to the community. How are we going to do that?
As usual, you're one step ahead of me. So.
We can make a little banner on the website.
It'll be prominently displayed.
Ms. Valenzuela just left, but we will pass that along to her.
So if there's Ms. Crowley?
Just, again, a clarifying, if we have this document, which I'd love to read again, is that for public consumption, or do we wait until the board meeting?
No, the final recommendation and draft final report will be attached to the board packet, probably not tomorrow when the board packet goes, but at some point over the weekend, so ahead of the actual board delivery of the report next Tuesday. And it will, like everything else that we've done, will be, out there and in the, beautiful Google Doc that Ms. Valenzuela, that Dr. Valenzuela, nurtures. It will also be there.
Thank you.
There's nothing else. And if there's no objection, we will adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much for your time.